On this episode of the Post Christian Podcast, I'm excited to have with me Ben Blackwell. How you doing, Ben?
Yeah, great. It's great to be with you.
So we met via the interwebs. I have been intrigued by the school which you're serving at, and it sounds like you've been there for 5 years. Tell us a little bit about Westminster.
Yeah, so it's was started about 15, 20 years ago by a guy who um, most of the theological training in the UK is done through the universities, and so Oxford, Cambridge, and they're not confessionally Christian anymore, but they still often teach Christian theology and such. And he wanted to keep the rigor of that, but also have it absolutely confessional. And particularly, we're from an evangelical and charismatic angle, and so trying to bring those two worlds together to keep so that seminary is not cemetery, I guess, in that sense. So you don't lose your faith, but that you're actually enlivened in your experience of Jesus and in the process.
Well, I love that. Yeah, cemetery is not what people want to spend money and go to. I did want to ask you, obviously you don't have a British accent, so you're not originally from the UK.
Yeah, no, I did my doctoral work up in Durham, which is not super known in the U.S., but it's where the rich kids go, is what I learned. If they didn't get into Oxford and Cambridge, they go to Durham. That's the next option there. But studied New Testament. But the what happened is I ended up working for N.T. Wright when he was the Bishop of Durham there, and so had a great experience doing that. But in that time frame, I also met the principal, is what they call the president here of this seminary, and got to work for him for about a year as well too. And then got a job back in Houston, where it was closer to home for us. We were there for 12 years at Houston Christian, and then ran the seminary there, and then came back here to take over ultimately as the principal of Westminster here. So I've been here about a year full time. Have taught here for about 10 years by distance.
Wow. Well, you obviously have a unique vantage point coming from the south of the United States and now in UK. Obviously, there's a post-Christian kind of environments
Mm.
in different pockets of America. Big cities are probably more post-Christian, perhaps than some rural places in the South. What are some of the things you've found about serving in a post-Christian environment there in the UK that you found challenging, but also that you found liberating?
Yeah, there are elements of this actually that hit in Houston. Living in Dallas before, it was kind of more Bible Belt kind of things, and seems to me that Houston is where the cities of the U.S. will be, 20, 30 years from now, in this sense that 25% of the working age population in Houston is foreign born.
Wow.
And so at Houston Christian, when I would teach an intro to the Bible class, well, about 10 or 20% of our students are active, not just not Christian, they're active participants of some other faith tradition. So you'd have Hindu, Muslim, Buddhists. And in that sense, part of it's the same types of conversations that I saw arising there were the ones that are normal here, in the
Yeah.
sense that Christianity is not the default position anymore. So
Hmm.
HCU as a university is still confessionally evangelical, and you have chapel and all that kind of stuff. But I would say the majority of students there were not believers. So if you had an intro to Bible class that I would teach, the first class I would teach is what's John 3:16, but not what are the words there. It's like they don't even know what the word John is, the number three means, or the 16 is. And
All
so those,
new.
yeah, the same kind of conversations here. Church attendance is much less here in that sense. So it's more about 5%. And so when I got my driver's license back in when we lived in Durham, we did, 4 or 5 driving lessons to see how they test differently and all that. And the guy that was in his mid 50s or so, and he's like, I'm not a Christian. I couldn't tell you one person that I know that's Christian. So no friend, no
Wow.
family member.
Yeah.
So when you get to those low percentages of church attendance, then Christianity becomes just some idea that exists rather than you've not been harmed by the church. You don't. It's not that
Hmm.
it's not atheism, I guess, apatheism or whatever that
Mm.
you talk about. But a lot of people here just have no. The church is a museum. You
Mm.
know, you see
Yeah.
these old churches, and of course many here are hundreds of years old, but they're not something that you've ever had an experience with yourself. And that's great in some ways because they don't have these negative experiences that they have to undo, right?
Yes.
But and so it's actually opened up, and I've been talking to a variety of people. A woman yesterday that works with university students here, and she said, and there's been the sea change of people, the way college students are just open to spirituality and things like that.
Hmm.
And so,
Hmm.
in general, and so Christianity kind of fits in that. It's not and so there's different pros and cons to that, I guess, then.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. There's not the church baggage with some of the folks that we're trying to reach. I mean, we were so, blessed this summer. We've had, several folks get baptized in their 40s, and this is their first church experience. Just baptized a 62-year-old white guy who's been in Austin since 1991, coming out of Hinduism and New Age. Church is not what he's familiar with, and he
Mm.
comes in on a Sunday morning wanting to be baptized after having read from Genesis through First Corinthians. you know,
Okay.
and he's watching YouTube videos. And I told him, well, let's talk a little bit before one, we're not baptizing today, but two, I want to hear your story. And sure enough,
Mm.
just there is it seems like God is at work in the lives of people who don't have that Christian background. And sometimes Christians can get in the way of that. I wonder, as you're training up future pastors and church leaders there at Westminster, what are some of the things you're hoping every student knows or understands before they graduate? What are some of the core issues you think would help us be more effective in an increasingly post-Christian world?
Yeah, well, almost all of our programs have the word kingdom theology in it in some way. So an MA or a BA in kingdom theology. We don't have as many electives and things like a traditional US program would have, but in that, I think the whole idea is that what Jesus did for ministry is what we're supposed to be doing for ministry. And so if you look at Jesus, Mark or Matthew 9, right, it says that Jesus went around everywhere, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the kingdom of God and healing people. And then he tells the disciples, pray for God to send out harvesters. And what he immediately in Matthew 10, then he sends out the 12 to go do the exact same things he's been doing, preach the kingdom of God and then pray for people. And it seems to me that this is one things that happens in theological colleges or seminaries is that you talk about somebody else's experience, right? So ancient Israelites or first century Christians in the New Testament or church history or something like that. And our whole idea here is not to only talk about theology as a third person and the third person about what they're doing. It's like, have you experienced Christ yourself, And so for us, then that encounter with Jesus is quite important as part of
Mm-hmm.
the theological training. So it's not something we just talk about theology. It's like we try to experience it. But one of those, I think, essential to Jesus's kingdom ministry was praying for people to encounter God themselves, right? So he would preach the kingdom of God, but also pray for them to experience that. And of course, in the ancient world, physical healing was one of the greatest needs, and so that's one of the primary things he engaged on. With our greater health systems and things like that, it doesn't mean that physical healing's off the table or by any means, but I think just a great question that replicates that is how can I pray for you? Like where do you need to see, Jesus' evangelism technique wasn't telling they're a sinner first and then this good news. It was more like where's your need right now? How can you experience Jesus in the midst of that need? And then get drawn into that conversation about who is this Jesus guy that you've just encountered?
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems to me that one of the greatest techniques we can have to just reach regular folks is like, what's going on in your life? Where would you like to see God bring transformation to that? And even take that time right then. Can I pray for you right now about that?
Mm-hmm.
That's a risky prayer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, it's also one of the things I think is quite important about this is that some evangelistic techniques that we've been involved in the past are much more confrontational. Like, where are
Mm-hmm.
you going to go when you die right now? And like, I even get a bit nervous when people ask
Right.
me that question. I have a very good answer for it. I don't
Yeah.
have it. But when you ask, so you're kind of head to head, it feels competitive in that sense. But
Mm-hmm.
if you ask them, what are you facing right now? What's your problem? You're standing shoulder to shoulder with them. And so
Yeah.
you're facing that problem with them. And so you're seen as an ally rather than somebody that's just trying to win them over.
Yeah, that's really well said. I loved your website, wtctheology.org.uk. It says transforming people through life-giving theology in the presence and power of the Spirit. I just think what you described is so critical. Like this is a kingdom with Jesus as our leader and he's still alive and you
Mm.
can encounter him and experience him and that's what we're inviting people into, and I just love how even from your vantage point as an academic, it's absolutely about that relationship with Jesus. Speaking of academic, you've written several books and we'll be giving away copies of some of your books to those who sign up for my email newsletter at ericbryant.org. Talk a little bit about engaging theology as well as some of the books you have here on. It looks like you've been involved with reading Hebrews in context or reading Mark in context. Talk about that series of books and even the others you've written.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The in context books are a way to help people understand the world that Jesus and Paul and the New Testament writers lived in. So, in that sense, the New Testament early Christians, they're reading the Old Testament. And in a way, we might think of this as contemporary Americans reading the Constitution, right? It's what sets the tone for things. But political discourse, just reading the Constitution doesn't tell you a whole lot about what it looks like to be a Republican or a Democrat today, right? There's all this discourse, contemporary fights about economics and voting and all that kind of stuff. And so early Christians, so Jesus and Paul were in the midst of Jews who were reading the Old Testament and they were having all sorts of debates about that. And so if you don't have a window into what those contemporary debates are, you don't have a sense of what all the answers or things there are. And so those in context books are there to introduce people that are not specialists to these ideas. Sometimes you read academic books, right? And the whole idea, they're written to other academics. And so all these chapters are 6 pages long. So, if you can read them on the can, one of them in that kind of time frame and such. So, but they're going to be much more interest to the historian buffs, like what are other Jews at the time of Jesus thinking. But the engaging theology is written to a much wider audience. And the way we frame it in a lot of ways is it's the Bible project for systematic theology.
Mm.
So helping people understand the Trinity or the church or salvation and eschatology, end times, all this kind of stuff, and in light of a coherent story that holds it all together. And so one of the other different things that we do with that is a little bit with world religions. So we wrote it there in the midst of Houston, which is vying with New York for the most ethnically diverse city in the U.S. now. And so I was surrounded when I moved there. I didn't have that much experience with, Muslims or Hindu, Buddhist, but it's like everybody is somebody not Christian there. And so, what does it look like to talk about God as Trinity in the context with these other religions, or even Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, and so, in that sense, it's not only taking theology and bringing it out of the Bible, but also what does it look like for that theology then to compel us to engage a world we live in that's pluralistic and diverse, and live that out there. And so, just a way for us to encourage Christians to go that next step beyond just Sunday school knowledge and have an understanding of how it fits together.
I love it. That's very helpful. Thank you for those resources. And I did want to give you a chance to encourage us, those who are listening, maybe church leaders. We're in the midst of a very divided time here in the
Mm,
US. Things in the UK, I'm sure, are also just as heated in different ways. Christianity often is not portrayed in a favorable light on the news. And for good reason. People who claim to
mm,
be Christians aren't representing Jesus very well.
mm.
But maybe to that church leader that's on the verge of giving up or unsure of how to move forward, what keeps you going, or what encouragement do you have for church leaders in this season?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to come here where there is can be a sense of defeatism.
Mm.
The church attendance is 4 or 5%, and even the more mainline groups here are even dropping off even faster. And so you can have this sense of like, gosh, it's all going away, I guess, in a sense. But one of the things for us is kind of in this low church independent, space of non-denominational, charismatic, evangelical, we kind of draw from all different realms is, and there's a lot of life there. And, when you look at the Christianity as this big picture, particularly in the States and the political angle that Christianity has, you either have this, I don't know, you can either have this decline model or just this sense that we need to fight about politics and all that a good bit. And one of the things that's moving here is like, no, it's just that day-to-day work of just living with people in the church, almost kind of a priestly function of being with them when they have kids and their parents die and when they suffer, financial setbacks and all that kind of stuff. Just that work is just, it reframes when you look at just at the granular level, how much more important that is. And if you're trying to think about this macro position of the church in the US, you might get depressed about that. But at the same time, we're not called to do that. 99.9% of people are not called to do ministry in that space. We're doing
Yeah.
local ministry with local families and getting to see those lives changed. And in that sense, then it is a beautiful thing to see. Even more so, it becomes more stark when the church becomes less known. Then it's like actually this grace that we live out. So much of what we have in the modern West are echoes of our
Mm.
Christian heritage. And so, in that sense, we don't always see how unique the faith is. But then, when you start to be in a place where the faith is less and less, basically here in the 60s are when people quit taking their kids to church.
Yeah.
And so, people in their 50s and below, by and large, don't have any church experience. And
Yeah.
so then they don't have those echoes of grace that we have. And so then you start to see their lives and families kind of struggling. And the gospel means real things, to that. And so I think the US is a few years behind that. And so I think we'll be tempted to try to do some of these more macro institutional ways of doing faith when actually probably a lot more um, be a lot more effective to focus on our local communities
Yeah. Yeah.
and see that change that happens there.
That's right. It's the one at a time, life by life
Mm.
transformation that leads to, personal renewal, but also a local church renewal, city
Mm.
renewal, a spiritual renewal. That's what we're praying for and going towards. Thank you, Ben, for taking some time with us. Keep up your good work there in the UK and really appreciate the resources you been working on and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, appreciate that.